The Galactic Empire stretched across 1,000 worlds. Its banners hung above shining cities and its war fleets filled the skies of conquered planets. For generations, no one had dared to challenge its rule. To the Empire, every new species it encountered was simply another name to add to its long list of subjects. Resistance always ended the same way. A show of force, a crushing battle, and then surrender. Among the stars, the Empire was feared more than storms or famine. The memory of past defeats kept smaller civilizations obedient. When whispers of humanity reached the Imperial Council, the reaction was one of cold certainty. Humanity would be no different. They would fall like the rest. The first detailed reports on humans came from distant scouts. The species was young by galactic standards, barely reaching out into the wider galaxy. They had colonized only a few dozen star systems and were still expanding at a steady pace. To the Empire, this seemed laughable. The humans had no grand fleets, no massive citadels, and no history of ruling vast territories. The Council saw them as a minor species, nothing more. When the decision was made to send an armada, no one in the imperial court questioned it. Admirals expected the campaign to be a short one. In their view, the humans would fight for a while, then realize their mistake. The Empire had crushed greater powers in the past. Surely this small and scattered species would not be able to resist. Yet even in the planning halls, a few voices whispered caution. The reports from the scouts had mentioned unusual traits. Humans were adaptable, quick to improvise, and strangely determined. They were willing to risk their lives in ways that other species would never attempt. But these warnings were dismissed. Admirals who had never lost a war were not interested in doubts. The invasion began with thunder. Imperial warships appeared at the edge of a human colony system, their hulls shining in formation. The fleet numbered in the thousands, enough to overwhelm any ordinary resistance. Civilizations across the galaxy had seen the same display before, and it always ended with silence. On the human colony of Luma, the sky darkened as shadows of the vast fleet passed overhead. Civilians looked upward with fear, while soldiers prepared for a fight that seemed impossible to win. Messages crackled across human command centers, reporting the scale of the incoming force. Leaders understood what they faced. This was not a raid or a border skirmish. It was the full attention of the Galactic Empire. The human fleet gathered near the colony's defense line. Their numbers were far smaller, their ships less advanced in design. Compared to the Empire's vessels, they looked fragile. Even the Imperial officers watching from their command decks smiled at the sight. To them, this would be over quickly. But when the battle began, the humans did not retreat. They did not scatter or surrender. They moved with surprising coordination, darting between the Empire's heavier ships and striking at weak points with precision. Every ship fought with a determination that stunned the Empire's commanders. The humans knew they were outnumbered, yet they pressed forward as if they believed victory was still possible. Hours stretched into a full day of combat. Imperial fleets had expected to crush resistance in moments, but the humans refused to break. Their smaller ships sacrificed themselves to protect larger ones. Pilots hurled their vessels into desperate maneuvers that no Imperial commander would have considered sane. What should have been a simple victory was turning into a costly struggle. From orbit above Luma, civilians watched the sky flash with fire. Each burst of light carried hope or despair. When a human ship fell, sorrow spread, but when an Imperial cruiser exploded under unexpected fire, cheers rose across the colony. The people realized something the Empire had not. Humanity was not simply fighting to defend territory. They were fighting to prove they would not be broken. Admiral Saran of the Imperial Fleet watched the reports with rising unease. He had fought dozens of campaigns, yet never had a minor species resisted like this. Losses were climbing higher than expected, and his officers began to exchange worried looks. The humans were not supposed to be capable of such resistance. By the time the sun set on Luma, the first clash had already become legend among the survivors. The human fleet was battered and broken, but it had not gone quietly. Against impossible odds, they had forced the Empire to spend far more strength than it had planned. For the first time in many years, the Galactic Empire was unsettled. In the quiet aftermath of battle, whispers spread among Imperial crews. If this was the power of a single human colony fleet, what strength might the rest of their people hold? The Empire had come expecting surrender, but instead it had found defiance. Humanity had shown its spirit, and that spirit would not be forgotten. The war had only begun. The smoke of battle still lingered over Luma's orbit. Wreckage of ships, both human and Imperial, drifted silently among the stars. Fires burned inside shattered hulls, and broken metal floated past like forgotten relics. The humans had fought with everything they had, but their fleet was now reduced to scattered survivors. From the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Saran studied the tactical screens. His fleet still filled the system, a force of overwhelming size, yet his face was not calm. He could not ignore the numbers. Losses were far higher than expected. A dozen heavy cruisers and nearly 50 destroyers had been destroyed. Hundreds more had taken damage. The humans should not have been able to inflict such wounds, not with their limited ships and older designs. His officers stood at their stations in silence. Normally after a victory, cheers and celebration would echo across the command decks. This time there was only unease. One officer finally spoke, his voice low. "They fought beyond reason, Admiral. Their ships should have retreated long ago, yet they stayed." Saran said nothing at first. He had seen resistance before, but this was different. Other species broke under the pressure of the Empire's might. They lost heart when the odds were too great. The humans, however, had pressed forward with reckless courage. They had turned their weakness into a weapon. He could not understand it, and that troubled him. On the surface of Luma, survivors gathered in the damaged cities. Smoke rose from shattered towers, but the people refused to surrender. Soldiers who had defended the skies now stood among the ruins, vowing to rebuild. Families comforted one another, whispering that the sacrifice of the fleet would not be forgotten. For the first time in their history, humanity had faced the Empire directly and proved that they could fight. In human command centers across other colonies, the reports spread quickly. At first, leaders grieved at the loss of so many ships and lives. Yet when they read the details, their sorrow changed into determination. The humans had forced the Empire to bleed, something no small species had achieved in living memory. That meant the Empire was not untouchable. Messages of encouragement traveled from colony to colony. Engineers promised to work day and night to repair and build new ships. Pilots lined up to volunteer, eager to replace those who had fallen. Even civilians who had never lifted a weapon spoke of resistance. Humanity was awakening to a truth that shook them all: they were stronger together than they had ever believed. Meanwhile, within the Empire's High Council chambers, the news of the battle arrived. Council members expected another routine victory report, but when the casualty figures appeared, the chamber grew quiet. A senator spoke in disbelief. How could such a minor fleet cause this level of damage? An admiral present at the council tried to defend the report. The humans are reckless. They do not fight as we do. They throw themselves into danger without hesitation. Their methods are unpredictable, and their losses do not weaken their spirit as expected. Instead, it fuels them. The council members shifted uneasily. The empire had fought many enemies, but none had ever been described in such a way. To them, war was a calculation. If the enemy lost too much, the fight ended. But humans did not follow that rule. They had turned loss into fuel. That thought unsettled the entire chamber. Back on Luma, survivors sent out a final message before their communications fell silent. It was not a plea for mercy but a declaration. We are not finished. This is only the beginning. The message spread across human space and reached other species as well. To some, it sounded like the cry of defiance from a doomed people. To others, it sounded like the start of something larger. The galaxy, long accustomed to the unchallenged rule of the Empire, now whispered a dangerous question. Could humanity become the one power that the Empire could not break? For Admiral Saran, the thought weighed heavily as he watched the remains of the human fleet drift across the void. His officers waited for his command to begin the next phase of the invasion. Yet for the first time in his career, Saran hesitated. The humans had already cost him more than he expected. What would happen when the Empire faced them again, not in one colony, but across their entire people? In the silence of his flagship, Saran finally spoke to his officers. Do not underestimate them. This battle is not the end. It is only the start of something far greater. His words carried more truth than he realized. Across human colonies, a spark had been lit. A spark that would soon grow into a flame strong enough to shake the foundations of the greatest power in the galaxy. The Empire had won the first clash, but it had awakened an enemy unlike any it had faced before. The war was no longer just about conquest. It was about survival, both for the humans and for the Empire that thought itself eternal. The Battle of Lumo left scars across the stars. The wreckage of ships still circled the planet, glowing in the reflection of its sun. Human civilians looked up at the burning trails and broken metal drifting in orbit, each piece a reminder of the price paid. Yet beneath the sorrow, there was pride. Against the greatest empire in the galaxy, humanity had stood and fought, and their defiance had shaken the enemy. On the colony itself, rebuilding began before the smoke had cleared. Engineers gathered what resources they could find, repairing damaged power grids and patching holes in the city's shield domes. Volunteers worked alongside soldiers, carrying supplies and caring for the wounded. No one spoke of surrender. Instead, they spoke of preparing for the next time the Empire came. In a small command center hidden beneath the surface, human officers studied the final reports from the battle. The numbers were grim. More than 70% of the defending fleet was destroyed. Thousands of lives had been lost. Yet every officer in the room understood something important. They had inflicted losses on the Empire that no other small power had managed in centuries. Commander Ulrich, one of the surviving officers from the fleet, leaned over the table. His voice was steady, though his eyes were tired. We lost many, but the Empire paid a price. That alone changes everything. We showed the galaxy that they can be hurt. We showed ourselves that we can fight. The officers around him nodded. They all knew the truth. The Battle of Luma was not the end of humanity. It was the beginning of resistance. Far across the stars, inside the glittering halls of the imperial capital, the High Council met again. The chamber was filled with silence as they studied the reports from Admiral Saran. The figures were undeniable. The humans had fought with unexpected strength. The Empire had achieved victory, but it had been costly, far more costly than predicted. Counselor Vera, an elder with centuries of service, raised her voice. This should have been a simple conquest. Yet these humans have wounded our pride and our fleets. If this is how they fight with one colony, what will happen when we face their entire people? Some council members dismissed the concern. They claimed that humans were reckless, that their courage would not last against the full power of the Empire. But others remained uneasy. The Empire's strength had always rested on fear. If humanity proved that the Empire could be resisted, then fear itself would weaken. Admiral Saran stood before the council, his expression grim. He had led many campaigns and crushed many civilizations, yet this time he spoke with caution. They are not like others we have faced. They do not accept defeat as the natural end. They fight even when the outcome seems impossible. If we underestimate them again, we may invite disaster. The council chamber fell into murmurs. Some scoffed at the warning, others listened in silence. But one truth was clear to all: humanity had forced the Empire to reconsider, something no young species had ever done. Meanwhile, across human colonies, the story of Luma spread like fire. Every world heard the details of how their fleet had stood against the Empire's armada. Citizens who had once feared the Empire now found courage. Families who had lost loved ones promised to honor their sacrifice by standing strong. The battle had united humanity in a way no leader or council had achieved before. On the industrial world of Reiner, shipyards worked day and night. Engineers designed improvements to weapons and shields, learning quickly from the wreckage of both human and imperial ships. Every lesson was turned into progress. On the farming world of Maras, civilians donated resources freely, sending food and supplies to the front lines. Even the smallest colonies contributed, proving that every human world saw the struggle as their own. For the first time, humanity was not thinking only of survival. They were thinking of victory. At the same time, whispers traveled beyond human space. Neighboring species, long under the shadow of the Empire, listened closely to the reports. Some dismissed the news as exaggeration, but others dared to hope. If the humans could wound the Empire, perhaps others could as well. Old fears began to weaken, replaced by quiet anticipation. Back on Luma, Commander Ulrich stood outside the command center and looked at the sky. The stars above seemed unchanged, but he knew the galaxy itself had shifted. The Empire had won the battle, but in doing so, they had revealed their weakness. Humanity now understood the truth. The Empire was not invincible. Ulrich whispered to himself, though no one else could hear. They think this was our best. They think this was all we had. They have no idea what is coming. His words captured the spirit of humanity across every world. The Empire believed the fight at Luma was the full measure of human strength. They were wrong. Humanity was just beginning to rise, and the next battles would show the galaxy what their people could truly become. The aftermath of Luma was not defeat. It was the spark of a fire that would grow until even the greatest empire in the galaxy trembled. The Galactic Empire celebrated the Battle of Luma as a victory. Reports were sent across their territories, declaring that another species had been crushed under the might of the fleet. On the surface, the news was meant to inspire confidence and remind the galaxy of imperial dominance. But behind the polished announcements, doubts were beginning to spread. In the capital, the council chambers were filled with argument. Some leaders insisted that the matter was finished. Humanity had been defeated, their fleet destroyed, their colony crippled. To them, it was proof that the empire remained unshakable. Yet others could not forget the heavy losses. The humans had destroyed ships that should have been untouchable. They had fought until the last moment, and even in defeat, they had shown no submission. Admiral Saran sat in silence as he listened to the debate. His thoughts were not on politics but on the reports from his officers. The human fleet they had faced was small, only a fraction of their total strength. What troubled him was the possibility that humanity's resistance had only begun. He had commanded fleets for centuries, but never had a battle left him with such unease. They were not fighting with desperation, Saran finally said to the council. They were fighting with purpose. That was not the end of their strength. That was only the beginning. Some councillors dismissed his words, but others listened carefully. The empire was powerful, but it had grown used to easy victories. Perhaps too used to them. Meanwhile, in human space, the truth of the battle spread quickly. Survivors from Luma were carried to nearby colonies, bringing with them stories of the courage shown in orbit. Families who had lost loved ones spoke of pride instead of despair. Across the colonies, a sense of unity grew. Humanity had been tested, and instead of breaking, they had discovered their will to fight. On the industrial world of Reiner, shipyards glowed with activity. Engineers worked day and night, salvaging wreckage from the battle and studying every piece of Imperial technology they could find. Each broken engine, each shattered weapon was a lesson. Humans had always learned quickly, and now they were learning from the galaxy's most advanced war machine. On the training grounds of Solis, young pilots pushed themselves to exhaustion. They studied the battle records, memorizing the maneuvers that had allowed their people to survive against impossible odds. Every pilot wanted to prove worthy of those who had fallen. Where fear once lingered, determination had taken root. The Empire, however, still believed that humanity had already shown its full strength. In their arrogance, they assumed that the destroyed fleet at Luma represented the heart of human power. They thought the war was nearly over. This was their greatest mistake. When scouts returned with new information, the truth became clear. The fleet at Luma had not been humanity's main force. It had been only one defense group, drawn from a handful of colonies. Hundreds of other ships remained across human space, and more were being built every day. The Empire had fought only a fragment of humanity, and even that fragment had inflicted a painful cost. Admiral Saran read the new reports with a heavy heart. He had warned the council, but now the evidence was undeniable. The humans were not finished. They were rising with greater strength than before. For the first time in his long career, he wondered if the Empire had awakened an enemy it could not easily crush. On the colony world of Maras, a gathering was held in a great hall carved from stone. Leaders from many human systems attended, their faces lit by the glow of a central fire. Commander Ulrich, survivor of Luma, stood before them. His voice carried across the chamber. The Empire believes we are weak. They believe the fleet at Luma was all we had. Let them believe it. Because when they return, they will see the truth. Humanity is not broken. Humanity is united. The hall shook with the sound of voices rising in agreement. For the first time, humanity was not divided by distance or by colony. They were one people, bound together by the challenge of survival. Across the galaxy, whispers spread among other species who had long feared the Empire. They listened to the human broadcasts and saw the signs of resistance. Some were cautious, others hopeful, but all knew that something had changed. The Empire was no longer unchallenged. A new force had entered the stage, one that refused to bow. The mistaken assumption of the Empire would soon cost them dearly. They thought humanity was defeated. They thought the war was already won. but humanity was preparing for battles that would shake the stars. In the quiet of space, among the drifting wreckage of Luma, the truth lingered like an echo. The Empire had not crushed humanity. It had awakened it. Across human space, the memory of Luma burned bright. Families mourned their losses, but grief turned into determination. For the first time in their history, the scattered colonies no longer saw themselves as separate. They had faced the greatest power in the galaxy, and though one world had suffered, the courage of its defenders had united all others. On Earth, the birthplace of humanity, leaders met in a vast chamber once used for political disputes. Now it was filled with commanders, engineers, and scientists. Holograms of the galaxy hovered above the table, showing the reach of the Empire and the fragile line of human colonies. The room was tense but filled with resolve. Commander Ulrich, survivor of the Luma battle, stood before the gathering. His voice carried the weight of both loss and hope. The Empire believes Luma was all we could give. They believe our strength is already spent. We will show them they are wrong. Humanity is not weak, and humanity is not finished. The chamber filled with agreement. Every colony had pledged ships, resources, and people. Even distant settlements with little to spare sent what they could. For the first time, humanity was acting as one force. In the shipyards of Reiner, sparks flew as engineers worked on massive new vessels. They used fragments of Imperial wreckage recovered from Luma, studying the armor and weapons with hungry eyes. What they could not copy, they improved in their own way. Human engineers had always been skilled at improvisation, and now they used that gift to turn weakness into strength. Ships that once took years to build were completed in months. On Solis, the training grounds roared with the engines of fighters. New pilots practiced maneuvers again and again, pushing themselves to the edge. They studied the tactics of the Luma battle, learning how to strike faster and evade the Empire's heavy guns. Their instructors reminded them constantly of one truth. You are not fighting to survive a single battle. You are fighting to remind the Empire that humanity will not kneel. On the farming worlds, civilians who had never held weapons volunteered for service. Some became medics, others joined support crews. Farmers donated food to supply fleets, and miners worked day and night to send precious metals to the shipyards. Every person found a way to contribute. The Empire had expected fear. Instead, it had awakened unity. Meanwhile, the Empire prepared its second campaign. Confident in its vast resources, it began gathering more fleets, determined to erase the embarrassment of Luma. Yet within the Imperial ranks, unease remained. Soldiers whispered about the humans. They remembered how small ships had torn apart mighty cruisers. They remembered how human pilots had fought until the last breath. The fear of facing such enemies again began to spread quietly among the crews. Back in human space, Commander Ulrich met with his closest officers aboard the newly built flagship Resolute. Its hull was reinforced with alloys tested against Imperial weapons. The bridge glowed with energy as the ship prepared for its first mission. Ulrich studied the star maps and spoke with calm determination. The Empire is moving again. They believe they can crush us with more numbers. But we are not waiting this time. We will not defend passively. We will strike first, where they are weak. His officers nodded. Humanity had learned that fighting only at the edge of their colonies would lead to endless destruction. They had to take the war beyond their borders, to make the Empire feel the danger it had always forced on others. The first human raids began soon after. Small fleets jumped into Imperial supply lines, striking quickly before vanishing back into the dark. Fuel depots and transport convoys went up in flames. Each raid was a reminder that humanity was no longer hiding. News of these attacks spread faster than the Empire could control. On conquered worlds, oppressed species heard the whispers and felt a spark of hope. If the Empire could be challenged, perhaps freedom was possible. The human colonies celebrated each victory, no matter how small. They cheered for the return of damaged ships and honored the crews that did not come back. Every battle reinforced the truth. Humanity was not standing on the defensive anymore. They were taking the war into the heart of the Empire. At night, in cities across human space, families looked to the stars with pride. Children heard stories of the defenders of Luma and the new fleets rising to continue their fight. The thought of the Empire no longer brought only fear. It brought determination. In the halls of the Empire, this shift did not go unnoticed. Admiral Saran read the latest reports with grim eyes. Each raid cost the Empire more than it admitted publicly. Each human broadcast spread defiance across the galaxy. For the first time, he realized that the Empire was no longer fighting to conquer humanity. It was fighting to stop humanity from inspiring everyone else. The human response had changed the nature of the war. It was no longer a question of whether they would survive. It was a question of how far they would go. And deep within human space, fleets continued to grow, pilots continued to train, and hope continued to spread. The galaxy was beginning to understand the truth. Humanity was not a minor species to be crushed. Humanity was a rising power, and the Empire's greatest mistake was awakening them. The Empire had thought victory was simple. After Luma, they had believed humanity was broken, ready to be subdued with the next fleet. But reality moved differently. Humanity had grown stronger, more organized, and more united than ever before. Admiral Saran watched the Imperial communications with a heavy heart. Reports came in from the outer fleets, describing unexpected attacks. Human forces had struck supply convoys, fuel stations, and even lightly defended outposts. Each attack was precise, coordinated, and designed to hurt the Empire more than any single fleet could. It was not chaos, it was strategy. They are everywhere and nowhere, Saran muttered to his officers. They move where we do not expect, strike where we are weakest, and vanish before we can respond. This is unlike anything we have faced. His officers nodded nervously. The Empire had never faced an enemy that could turn every disadvantage into a weapon. Other species would have fled, surrendered, or been crushed. Humans did none of these things. They adapted, improvised, and persisted. Every encounter revealed new tactics, new strategies, and new surprises. Across human space, the colonies worked together like never before. Resources flowed to shipyards, and newly trained crews were sent to the front lines. Engineers improved the designs of their ships, making them faster, stronger, and harder to hit. Pilots practiced tirelessly, learning how to anticipate Imperial movements. Every human understood that the Empire was powerful, but they also understood that cleverness, unity, and courage could match strength. Commander Ulrich stood on the bridge of the flagship Resolute, watching fleets prepare for another strike. He had learned from Luma and from the raids that followed. He knew that a direct confrontation would be costly, so they had to attack the Empire on multiple fronts simultaneously. It was a new kind of war, one in which the humans controlled the tempo. Remember this, Ulrich told his officers. We do not have the numbers they have. But we have ingenuity, determination, and unity. The Empire will try to crush us, but they will learn that numbers alone do not win against a species that refuses to surrender. Meanwhile, in the imperial capital, the council met again. Their confidence was shaken. Senators argued over the growing human threat. Some insisted on sending more fleets, believing sheer force would finish the war. Others urged caution, pointing out the losses from the first and second encounters. Every imperial officer knew that the humans were not ordinary. They did not act as expected. They were unpredictable, relentless, and deadly in ways that brute force could not always contain. Councillor Vera, who had once dismissed humanity as a minor nuisance, now spoke with concern. They have rebuilt faster than we anticipated. Their fleets are stronger, their defenses more organized. Every time we strike, we are met with resistance we cannot ignore. This is no longer a minor species. This is a challenge we must treat seriously. Her words spread unease throughout the chamber. The Empire had never faced a species that could force them to hesitate, and that hesitation alone was dangerous. On the front lines, human fleets continued their raids. Smaller strike teams harassed Imperial forces while larger fleets prepared ambushes in asteroid fields and nebulae. Every human action was designed to confuse, divide, and weaken the enemy. The Empire had learned that humans could be defeated in battle, but victory would always be costly and uncertain. In the colonies, civilians watched the reports of successful human strikes. They cheered, repaired damaged ships, and trained new pilots. Every citizen felt that they were part of the fight, whether on a ship or on the surface. The determination of humanity had become unstoppable. Admiral Saran knew that the coming battles would test everything. The Empire could pour more ships into the conflict, but the humans had shown that they were no longer predictable. Every move the Empire made could be countered, and every victory could come with a hidden cost. For the first time, Saran felt the weight of uncertainty in a war he had believed would be simple. Commander Ulrich, meanwhile, looked at the stars with quiet confidence. Humanity had lost before, but each loss had made them stronger. Every new ship, every trained crew, and every rebuilt colony added to their growing power. They would not simply defend themselves. They would take the fight to the Empire and force the galaxy to respect their courage. The Empire had thought the humans were weak. They had assumed the fleet at Luma was all they had. They were wrong. Humanity was not a single fleet, not a single colony. Humanity was an entire species, united by determination, courage, and ingenuity. The next stage of the war had begun. The Empire would face a force it had never expected, a force that refused to surrender. Humanity was no longer on the defensive. Humanity was taking control. Across the galaxy, the stars themselves seemed to witness the rising power of a species that would not be ignored. The galaxy had begun to change. Whispers of human victories traveled faster than any imperial proclamation. From distant colonies to the heart of the Empire, everyone spoke of the species that refused to bow. Humanity was no longer a minor power. It had grown into a force that could not be ignored. Commander Ulrich stood on the bridge of the flagship Resolute, looking at the formation of human fleets ready to strike. The fleet was larger than anything seen before, composed of ships rebuilt and improved from Luma's ashes. Pilots, engineers, and soldiers worked together as one. Each knew the stakes. The Empire had expected weakness, but they would find only strength. Ulrich's voice echoed across the bridge. We are not here to defend only our colonies. We are here to remind the galaxy that humanity will not be broken. We fight for every world, every family, every life lost to the Empire's arrogance. Today, we show them our true strength. The officers nodded, their faces set with determination. Human fleets had learned from every mistake, adapted to every threat, and used every challenge as a lesson. This battle would not be like Luma. This battle would be the moment the Empire finally understood humanity's power. Across human space, civilians and soldiers alike watched the fleets depart. People cheered as ships jumped to faster-than-light lanes, their engines glowing like fire across the void. Hope was no longer a fragile feeling. It had become a weapon. Every citizen felt part of the fight, part of the rising tide that would challenge the greatest empire in the galaxy. In the imperial capital, the council grew frantic. Reports came in from every front, supply lines disrupted, patrols ambushed, and fleets retreating under coordinated human attacks. The Empire's power was immense, but humans had learned to avoid direct confrontation when necessary and strike with maximum effect when opportunity appeared. Admiral Saran met with the council, his face grim. They are not just defending themselves anymore. They are forcing us to respond, dividing our fleets, and striking where we are weakest. This is no ordinary enemy. Humanity is organized, fearless, and relentless. Councillor Vera's voice trembled with worry. They have united every colony. Every system contributes to their fleets. Their losses only make them stronger. We underestimated them at Luma, and that mistake has already cost us dearly. Saran nodded. The Empire had believed that victory could be achieved through force alone. Humanity had shown that determination, ingenuity, and courage were just as important. The galaxy had never seen a species fight like this. The Empire had awoken an enemy it could not easily crush. On the battlefield, human fleets moved with precision. Smaller strike groups targeted weak points in the Empire's formations, while larger fleets cut off reinforcements. Every pilot, every ship, and every crew member worked as part of a single mind, guided by the lessons of countless battles. Where the Empire expected chaos, they found calculated strategy. Where the Empire expected retreat, they found courage. In the colonies, celebrations were mixed with quiet vigilance. Humanity had shown it could strike the Empire and survive, but they also knew the war was far from over. Engineers continued building ships, pilots continued training, and civilians continued preparing. The human spirit had grown into something unstoppable. Ulrich watched the stars, each one a potential battlefield, a place where humans could stand and fight. He remembered Luma, the first clash, the losses, and the courage displayed by those who had defended their home. Every victory since then had built upon that moment. Humanity had not only survived, it had become stronger, wiser, and more determined. The Empire had expected to dominate. It had expected surrender. Instead, it faced defiance, unity, and strategy it could not predict. The humans had changed the rules of the war. They had proven that strength alone did not determine the outcome. Spirit, determination, and cooperation could match even the mightiest fleets. As human fleets advanced into the heart of the Imperial-controlled sectors, messages were broadcast across human space. They were not declarations of threat or war. They were declarations of existence. We endure. We fight. We rise. Humanity will not be broken. Humanity will not bow. Humanity will shape the galaxy. Every citizen heard it. Every fleet responded to it. Every colony prepared for the next steps in a war they now believed they could win. Across the stars, hope burned brighter than ever before. Admiral Saran, watching the movements of the human fleets, felt the weight of reality. The Empire had faced many enemies, but none like this. Humanity was not simply resisting. Humanity was challenging the very notion of supremacy in the galaxy. Commander Ulrich smiled quietly. The battles had been hard, the losses had been great, but humanity had survived, learned, and risen stronger each time. The Empire believed it faced a species that could be defeated in a single campaign. They were wrong. Humanity had only just begun to show its full power. The galaxy had heard humanity's message. Humanity was no longer the underdog. Humanity was the rising force that the stars would remember. The Empire had been shaken, the colonies united, and the people determined. The war would continue, but humanity had left its mark. And that mark would never fade. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity stood tall against the mightiest power in existence.